Hi, my name's Ellie. Thanks for joining me today. So our universe is a lot older than Earth is, or the sun, our sun anyway. And there's still a lot for us to learn about how the history of the universe relates to our own existence. Now, warning right from the beginning, I'm not much of an astronomer and I'm also not much of a general scientist, but I wanted to show you why a recent discovery by scientists, astronomers, might lead to important clues about the ancient past. Imagine that the sun is a big campfire that's out there in the middle of space. It's radiating out this constant stream of charged particles called solar wind. And that wind, it travels a very long distance, but it doesn't go on forever because the sun pushes it outward until it hits a resistance. And that resistance is like a resistance of particles that's floating between the various stars. That outer edge where the sun's influence begins to wane and end is called the heliopause. Everything inside that boundary is the heliosphere. This is basically the sun's territory. The sun has its influence over that entire area, but it doesn't reach beyond what appears in this image to look like a kind of a bubble. So it can influence everything inside the bubble, but nothing outside of the bubble. In this image, you'll see that the sun is on the left and it's glowing and it's sending out the solar wind, right? Which is shown in the curved orange lines. The bluish bubble around it is the heliosphere, shaped like an oval that's stretched outward by the flow of particles. And on the right side, outside the line that's labeled heliopause, is interstellar space. That is the wider galaxy. It is the area of the galaxy that is outside of the sun's sphere of influence. All of the planets that we know about so far, including Earth, they orbit inside the heliosphere. So, for example, Mercury, Venus, Earth, and Mars, they all circle pretty close to the sun in comparison to the rest of this image. They're so small, if I were to dot them, you wouldn't be able to really see them. And they're so tight together that there's no point doing so. So instead, what I've done is I've placed an arrow that shows the approximate region of how close they sit to the sun collectively. The outer planets, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune, they're all placed further out, but they're still well within the bubble. And so they're shown by the next arrow. And just near the edge of the heliosphere, right at the boundary line that takes us to interstellar space, well, in 2012, that's where Voyager 1 managed to get. That was pretty remarkable. So Voyager 1 was the very first spacecraft, human spacecraft that is, human-made spacecraft, I should be very exact here, to enter interstellar space. Voyager 1 is still in space. It's not manned though. It's just a robot spacecraft that was launched by NASA in 1977. Its purpose was to study the outer planets and eventually explore interstellar space as well. It carries instruments to measure things like magnetic fields and particles and plasma waves, but it doesn't actually have a crew. The Voyager 1 mission was designed for long-term data collection, and it's still sending back that info about 50 years later after it was launched, nearly 50 years. I also have a fun fact for you, for those of you who aren't already aware of this, because I know some people probably will be. On board Voyager 1 is something that's called the Golden Record. It's a phonograph disc with sounds and images meant to represent Earth's life and culture. I'm assuming that's Earth's life and culture from 1977, so things have changed a little bit. But in terms of any ET founders, people who explore and end up finding this golden record, I guess we probably wouldn't have changed that much since 1977, relatively speaking. But this is interesting because that golden record was put on Voyager 1 just in case it's ever found by intelligent beings out there in the galaxy, which kind of reminds us that even though scientists don't officially admit to believing in ETs and things like that, they were still willing to hedge their bets by preparing for it just in case. You never know, just in case. So when Voyager 1 crossed into interstellar space in 2012, it was, of course, an exploration. And it found something. It found a little something, but it was significant. It found something ancient. What it did was it picked up a faint humming sound, a steady hum that was at around 3 kilohertz, I think. It was like tuning into a soft whisper in what we thought was going to be dead silence. And that showed us that space isn't truly empty, but it's filled with something which I guess you could think of as like a very fine, soft rain of particles that are producing the sound. There needs to be something out there in order for there to be a sound, because the sound is when it reverberates off something. So in other words, Voyager taught us that the void that we perceive beyond our solar bubble has actually got its own background noise, an unexpected but very simple clue that changed how we picture the great beyond. But you know what? That was a story that began 50 years ago. Today, right now, in 2025, scientists have their eyes on something a bit more recent. There is a comet out there that astronomers are calling 3I Atlas, and it's a particularly interesting and unusual comet. It actually has quite a few anomalies about it. It's coming our way, and it's expected to be about as close as you can get to the sun, as it's ever going to get to the sun, by around October of this year, not that far from now. The Atlas comet is estimated to be around 11 billion years old. That's pretty old. Now remember that Earth is around 4.5 billion years old. So yeah, significantly different. So that's an additional 7 or so billion years worth of history just about to come within reach of us. Atlas carries with it primordial dust, ice, and other who knows what from the earliest eras of our galaxy. And in today's show, we're going to examine how its unusual speed, because it's pretty fast, reveals its age, and why this might matter. Also, because it potentially holds many ancient lessons to be learned, and we might even be able to examine some of those lessons might be. So imagine that you're meeting a person for the very first time and you don't know this person at all. You know nothing about them. And you're looking at them and you're trying to figure out how old they might be. You might look at their skin, their hair, their clothing, their style of dress. I mean, do they have some wrinkles? Is their hair really lush and thick, like annoyingly like really young people? Or has it kind of thinned a little bit or become quite fine or something that generally happens with age? You might even clock this person's energy level. I mean, do they have that youthful exuberance that is very common with young people? Or have they settled down and are they sort of a bit more methodical and calmer about things? Because that helps you to understand a person's age as well. Well, astronomers do something very similar when they're trying to ascertain the age of stars. But instead of looking for something like wrinkles or style of dress or something, they look at phenomena. And one of the things they really like to look at is comets. Comets just like Atlas, or perhaps not just like Atlas, because Atlas is unusual, but comets. And the reason for that is because comets are very good time recorders. They're able to help scientists to be able to see how old the galaxy is. What they do is they swing around their star. So the comet is assigned or kind of is in the proximity of a certain star, and it's captured within the atmosphere of the star. And as it tends to swing around the star, and as it does, the energy propelled by the star kicks the comet outward, away from the star and into the galaxy. And sometimes, depending on the star itself, the comet could be flung so far away that it drifts off into what is sometimes called the cosmic deep freeze. And that is because it's so out there in the wider galaxy of interstellar space that it's a very, very cold place. Icy, icy cold, like we can't even imagine. Sometimes those comets that have been flung far out into space, they eventually double back and they come back to the star that first flung them out there. And the amount of time that it takes for the comet to return to the star is a huge clue about how old the star is. So the way that this works is that young stars send their comets out quite gently. And this is because the younger star hasn't been around long enough to have all of that really pent-up energy flowing through it that would cause more of a faster trajectory for the comet. So when the comet after that star eventually returns, it moves back pretty quickly. I mean, we're still talking pretty fast here, but faster, but not as fast as it would for an older star. The oldest stars have had billions of years worth of pent-up energy that allows it to sort of stir up and get stronger and stronger. And so when it flings the comet out, it does it much faster with much more force. And then the comet, as it travels and eventually returns, is also traveling much faster. Astronomers measure the speed of these returning comets. They map the trajectory of the comet and they compare it to the stars that they already know the age of. So for Atlas to have a speed of travel that gives it an age of up to 11 billion years, well, that's pretty incredible. It is unusually fast for a comet, which means that it comes from a very old star, a very long distance away. It's not an exact form of measurement, so I suppose it's a bit like trying to guess a person's age. You can get close, but not exact. But you know what? You can get close, and that's really important. And it does provide a very meaningful kind of window into the star's life story. So this matters, and the reason why it matters and the reason why it's a really big deal for astronomers. So in this image, you'll see that most things that we see in our sky, the things that we know about, like planets and moons and asteroids, well, they are less than 5 billion years old. Earth itself is 4.5 billion years old. So our solar system is really quite young compared to Atlas. A comet that predates the Earth by many billions of years is an incredible glimpse into the past. It gives us a rare look at primordial materials. It may carry dust and ice from an era where first galaxies were created and stars were forming. And understanding its age helps us to piece together the story of the galaxy. If Atlas was formed, say 11 billion years ago, it witnessed things like supernovas and galactic mergers and even the creation of our own sun. Its composition can show us what conditions were like in those ancient times when everything we already know about didn't even exist. It wasn't even conceived yet. So studying Atlas is like reading a time capsule from the very, 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 very early universe. So for centuries, humanity has been hunting for our true origin stories. What really brought us here and what are we really here for? When and how did our universe get created? What about our solar system? We've tried to interplay the interpretations of things like clay carved tablets from Sumer and the hieroglyphs of Egypt and even scrolls of Stoic wisdom found in Greece. We even have clues that appear in scripture that is available to everyone all of the time, and ancient writings that were found in caves and buried in places all over the world. But you know, we have a real problem pinning down the truth because all of these records are fragmented. I guess you could say that the only possible complete story, maybe kind of sorta, could be held in the secret archives of the Vatican, perhaps, right? I mean, but then they may not even know either because maybe they don't have the complete truth. But even if they do, they're not telling us, are they? So the rest of us really aren't much wiser. We only know bits and pieces of how we got here and how our ancestors imagined the cosmos or what was planned for us by our predecessors or maybe even by our creators. But now there's a comet out there that is older than our solar system. It could be as much as 3 times older. And later this year, it's going to be arriving. I mean, when I say arriving, I don't mean it's close enough to cause us harm, but it certainly is arriving close enough for scientists to examine it in detail. And it's going to bear dust and ice that is older than anything that we've ever been able to see before. Like finding the missing page that was torn out of our favorite cosmic book, right? I was going to say comic book, but cosmic book. Being able to analyze the ancient ingredients that make up the 3I Atlas comet could help to fill the gaps in our understanding of where we came from. It might even validate or possibly even challenge some of the ancient stories that we know, or some of the conjecture that comes from all kinds of gurus and experts and talking heads and even scientists who may not necessarily exactly know. And so what they do is they work with what they do know, and the rest of it, they kind of fill the gaps with what they think might be the case. and whatever it is that sounds right to an audience like us who really doesn't know either. So we're at the precipice of a time where we're going to actually know the truth. The funny thing is, this is something that has been predicted long ago by many, many people. So, for example, Edgar Cayce, 100 years ago. But it was also implied in some of the writings by Plato long before that, hundreds of years prior to that. So we're going back hundreds and hundreds of years to a time when we were warned that something was coming. It even appears in the Bible in kind of cryptic kind of ways and in other ancient writings as well. And for generations, people have been interpreting it in ways that suit their own narrative. It kind of suits this story that we've been told as a species. And it's been really easy to believe some of these stories because we don't really know anything for a fact to the contrary. At least we don't know for sure. We can kind of guess, we can fill the gaps and things like that. But suddenly, something physical is coming, and that's Atlas. Something physical is suddenly coming, and it's going to land in our laps. We can't dismiss that, and that's exactly what Atlas is going to be doing later this year. It's going to be landing right in our laps. I mean, hopefully not literally, but kind of, symbolically. And that it's going to be bringing with it the delivery of truth. And actually, the timing is really interesting. And I'm going to tell you why pretty soon in this video. So before I do that, let's look at what some of these previous historical kind of predictions were that I've just rattled off a few moments ago. So, for example, when you sift through Edgar Cayce's channeled readings that were conducted in the 1920s and 1930s, you'll encounter repeated references to a new star. Those are the words that are used, and how it heralds a huge leap in human consciousness. So the arrival or discovery of a new star gives us a huge leap in human consciousness. That's pretty significant. That's kind of interesting. And Edgar Cayce said that it comes like a delivery of insight, something new that would arrive and reshape our collective awareness. But long before Cayce was Plato. And in his writings called Timaeus, Plato speaks of history as being a series of cycles that are punctuated by cataclysms. And he describes a moment in time when hidden knowledge, long buried by the tides of time, resurfaces and challenges every established truth. Plato makes a warning that the epochs that we think we understand suddenly, they suddenly end because suddenly we realize something different has taken place here. And it happens when we receive revelations that completely upend our worldview. But let's look at something a bit more, I guess you could call it mainstream, and that's the Bible. And so in the Bible prophecies, there are some cosmic imageries that form part of the end times allegory. And I'll rattle off a few. But first of all, what we should note is that when we hear the words I and God and Lord, these are words that were put into the Bible. The original language, whether it be ancient Greek or Hebrew or Aramaic, never used those words. Instead, it used words that were either the names of some various different somethings, which sound kind of extraterrestrial when you if you're me and you've read the Bible as a person who's already been educated in lots of other theories, or it sounds a bit more like maybe Christ is the running name, and it refers to something like a Christ consciousness. So keep that in mind. But, for example, in the book of Joel, in chapter 2, verses 30 to 31, it says, I will show wonders in the heavens and on the earth, blood and fire and columns of smoke. The sun shall turn to darkness and the moon to blood before the great and awesome day of the Lord comes. So basically, if we think of the word God or Lord or I as being Christ, for example, then what we're seeing in here is that there will be phenomena in the cosmos that before our Christ consciousness returns. And that means it will propel an awakening of sorts based on things that are interstellar, that are taking place in the sky. And so this is actually using allegory and vivid celestial kind of upheavals in the story to describe a dramatic arrival of something that sounds quite like an interstellar event. So if we look at another passage, which is from Matthew 24:29, and I'll quote this one, it says, "Immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened and the moon will not give its light. The stars will fall from heaven and the powers of the heaven will be shaken." Now, most interesting to me is that last bit. The stars will fall from heaven and the powers of the heaven will be shaken. What this basically says is that there's an exotic kind of event that takes place that breaks through the celestial order of things. So it's something that's occurring with something falling from or coming from the sky that shakes up our understanding of everything. That's something. And then finally in Luke 21:25, it says, "There will be signs in the sun and the moon and the stars, and on earth distress of nations in perplexity at the roaring of the sea and the waves, for the powers of the heaven will be shaken." So basically this is talking about societal upheaval. The passage of Atlas could serve as a modern sign in the heavens, causing shifts in collective perception. And that collective shift in perception could lead to an upheaval of the status quo. So there are many, many instances that are worded in a variety of different ways that have been interpreted in the Bible already. But, who's to say that those interpretations are accurate? That's one of the things that I question around here. But there are many instances in the Bible that refer to an interstellar event that brings new awareness to the people. It basically repeats in numerous books now how the cosmic disruption ultimately unveils a divine truth, like the collapse of false narratives and the emergence of an unshakable reality, just like we've been expecting. Now, I'm not saying that the arrival of Atlas is going to produce all of this, or maybe, none of it, or maybe even just a tiny dot of something that grows over time. It may not happen overnight. I don't know. But what it is going to do in a physical sense is it's going to produce a revelation of new understanding about where we came from and how the universe was formed. That is an actual physical fact. So if you overlay the biblical prophecies and Plato's writings and Edgar Cayce's predictions over the recent scientific studies of the Atlas comet, there are patterns that begin to emerge that date back millennia. Voices have been warning us that the inescapable truth would suddenly descend on humanity. It would dissolve our comfort zones and force a reckoning of the things that we've been taking for granted for a really long time. And seriously, I can't wait. So let's have a look at how we can track the physical arrival of what might end up being the truth that we've been hoping for by tracking 3I Atlas, the comet. Okay. So that we can bring these ancient writings into the present day focus. So here are some key milestones for Atlas that we can track on a physical basis. Firstly, it was discovered in June 2023. It appeared in the form of a faint point in the constellation of Cassiopeia. So we know now when it was first discovered. But in October 2025, I think they say, towards the end of the month, Atlas is predicted to reach its closest proximity to the sun. When this happens, what's going to happen is it's going to heat up the icy exterior because the comet is covered in ice. It's been in deep space and it's extremely cold there. So it's going to heat up that icy exterior. And what will happen is that the dusty tail of the remnants that are being left behind as it scoots across the sky will begin to light up, making it visible to scientists. And scientists and other high-powered telescopes will be able to view the comet. So for the next few months after that, the comet will be closely examined and analysed for what evidence it has to share. And then in around December 2025, maybe even crossing over into January 26, Atlas will be at its closest proximity to Earth. It will be bright enough for the average backyard telescope, which is pretty exciting. And it's going to remain in close proximity for at least 2 months, possibly even a bit longer. What does that tell us? Think about the dates here and think about what I've been talking about for a really long time. That now takes us to around Easter 2026. just like the event, that mysterious event that's been described by Chris Bledsoe. Now, for anyone who doesn't know who Chris Bledsoe is a UFO experiencer who claimed he had an experience in 2007 where he claims that he saw a UFO, and he also was approached or visited by an angelic presence that he calls the Lady. Now, in 2012, the Lady returned and gave him predictions about the future, which is the same year, kind of interestingly, that Voyager 1, the first man-made object to ever enter interstellar space, well, it happened in 2012, the same year as the Lady gave predictions to Chris Bledsoe. It kind of makes you wonder, or at least it makes me wonder, because I'm always wondering about something. It makes me wonder whether Chris's encounter with the Lady, and in particular her return to him in 2012, was a direct result of humanity kind of breaking the barrier of space, being able to fly a human-made object out of our own solar system and into the outer galaxy. That may have gotten someone's attention. I don't know. Did our advancement at that time suddenly spark a response by our galactic neighbours? Now, Chris, just to bring this home, Chris has named 2026, beginning in Easter, as marking a huge revelation that changes everything. That was the prediction by the Lady. Her exact words were that something was going to happen, right? But then somewhere, when the red star of Regulus meets the eye of the Sphinx, all would be revealed. Well, Atlas, the comet, is red. Something to think about. And even though I'm looking at two dates, at the moment, I've been talking about this for a very long time on this channel, and I have a variety of videos that I will make sure are available in the description for anyone who wants to catch up. But I've been looking at a range of dates, one of them being Easter, and one of them being around about October, I think it was October 6th, 2026, because those are the two dates in 2026 when Regulus rises in direct alignment with the Eye of the Sphinx in Egypt. I'm partial to October because it rises at exactly the right time according to the Lady's prediction that was given to Chris Bledsoe. But there has been an astrologer who has sort of influenced Chris into believing it might be the other one, which is the Easter prediction. And they may even overlap. They might be a range there between the two in which there are significant events unfolding. And so I'm kind of looking at the whole thing, and I'm looking forward to next year because it sounds really interesting. However, I also wondered about the fact that Atlas is red. And so I thought it might be a good idea to check whether Atlas could be the comet that belongs to the Regulus star system, because wouldn't that be something? As it happens, no, it's highly unlikely. It's not impossible, but it's highly unlikely. So you'll see here in this image that Regulus sits within the constellation of Leo, and the trajectory of Atlas shows that it's likely to have come from the constellation of Sagittarius. They are physically a long way from one another, but it's worthwhile keeping it in mind. Now, this image is not a perfect image of location, but it's illustratively good enough to show that there is a huge difference between the two different constellations. And it is worthwhile keeping in mind because sometimes science can make mistakes. And also, if a comet has been drifting for billions of years, who knows where it's come from? Like I said at the top of the show, the manner in which they measure Atlas's trajectory and age isn't exact. It's a bit like trying to guess somebody's age. So, but you know what? We'll keep it all in mind. So let's move forward to when Atlas continues its journey away from Earth and disappears back into the deep cosmos at 60 kilometers per second, which is the speed that it's traveling at. 60 kilometers a second. I think that's 37 miles per second. It's like, and it's just gone. Well, that will be taking place towards the end of 2026 and into 2027. Can you see what I mean about the timeline? It's kind of uncanny. We have been predicting for a really long time, and I don't mean we as in me and my dog. I mean, and the cat, who's probably in her usual place, which is asleep under the covers somewhere. We, as in the world of spiritual inquiry, have been predicting that something is coming in around about 2026, somewhere in that year, probably somewhere towards the end of the year, but even crossing over into early 2027. and look at the timeline of Atlas. It's just sort of uncanny. It's very close to the various predictions in astrology that I've personally been talking about now on this show for nearly 2 years. And for those who are wondering, I still have my finger on the pulse of that. So even though I talk about a wide range of broad themes and things, I never forget. I never forget a thing. And so I'm still looking at that, and I want to continue to scratch that surface whenever I can, just in case. And so for anyone who wants to know more, I'm going to provide you with some videos here. I've got two that are of relevance to today's show. One of them is a video I did where I looked at the astrology of the Chris Bledsoe prediction. And that video is called The Day, Time and Place When We Meet Our New Reality. So the link for that is in the description for today's show. I also did another episode, which happened to be the very first radio show episode I did for KGRA, and that was called Convergence. And that's where I talk about the predictions and writings that link things like Atlantis to Plato to Edgar Cayce and also to Chris Bledsoe. I look at all three of them and how they kind of interplay over the course of hundreds and hundreds of years. So there you go. So that's the timeline from discovery in Cassiopeia to a fiery dance near the sun, and then to a final stretch and trajectory past the Earth before it disappears into deep space at around 60 kilometers per second. It's rare that something so far away feels as close as Atlas does, for me at least. And it's moments like this that remind us that we're part of something massive, something vast, and we're watching it unfold in real time. So whether you follow comets or prophecy or just your own gut senses and your intuitive insight, this moment feels really significant. Not because science says so, although that kind of helps a little bit, but because so many people here on this channel, but also just out there in the world, can see that things seem to be lining up. They line up with us, with this moment in time. And it's kind of, it kind of feels a little bit like we bought tickets for this moment to be here. And now, after a very long wait and some really bad cover bands as the warm-up act, the show is finally about to begin. It's really exciting, and it has a real impact on me. So I'm just wondering, how is this moment impacting you? Does it at all? Do you feel that you're changed by it, that you're awakened by it, enlightened in some way? Are you excited? Are you a bit nervous and apprehensive? I don't know. Do you feel any changes coming this way? Do you feel the convergence occurring? Because I really do. I also kind of feel as though I'm remembering things, except sometimes, they feel really real, even though I can't tell you exactly what it is that I'm remembering a lot of the time. But that's exactly how it feels, like a memory is returning. Or like something that was, lost is being refound or something, almost like in slow motion. It's really strange. Anyway, if you've had similar types of experiences or experiences of your own, just share your thoughts in the comments, even if it is just a sentence or two, or feel free to write an entire book of your life. Either way is fine. You can write the whole history. It's fine, because every bit helps. It helps me, but also it helps other people who are watching, because sometimes we need to see the words of other people in order to understand and put words to the things that we're feeling ourselves. So while the scientists are mapping out that outer sphere and waiting for the arrival of Atlas, we can map it on the inside. Exciting times. Welcome to the new world. This is Ellie Dreams and Under. I love knowing you're here, and I'll see you in my dreams.